Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay and my guest today is Amoda Maa Jeevan. And that means living a joyous life. And she's a spiritual teacher and she has 2 books out and one is on its way. And one is called How to Find God in Everything. And then the other one is called Change Your Life, Change Your World. I love how it's written in all these big letters, beautiful books. And the 3rd book, and that will also, we will talk in the interview mainly about the 3rd book, which will come out hopefully within the next few months. It's called Radical Awakening, the Birth of a New World and a New You. And this is, in the moment, the working title. It might change. So I'm happy that you are here. And there's something you mention in your new book, which I'm really interested to discuss more in depth, and that is we need to take a truly holistic spirituality. So what does that mean, and how did you come to this understanding? It needs to be a holistic. And in your own awakening, just talk about it, how you experienced that.
Well, there's this idea that enlightenment or awakening is an intellectual realization.
Yes.
Yeah, and very often it is. And it may begin that way, a shift in perception, seeing things differently. Old beliefs and habitual ways of seeing come collapsing, and we see a deeper reality. But unless that realization is fully embodied and includes every aspect of life, then it's not really serving its full purpose. And for me, that was my experience, which is why I wrote How to Find God in Everything. That everything is included in awakeness. Every aspect of life, there's nothing that isn't God. There's nothing that isn't an expression of the formlessness, that doesn't arise out of formlessness, and that includes everything. Our relationships, the nitty-gritty of our daily lives, even our finances, every relationship. And for me, that was my living experience, that when awakeness recognized itself through this vehicle, there wasn't an aspect of my life that wasn't included in that. I wasn't separate from that. And that's been a big journey. And I also feel that that's something that traditionally is not very much included, that once formlessness is realized, that there's a tendency to stay in that perspective. Not always, but traditionally. And that's certainly something that I find when I meet people and speak with people, that there tends to be a lopsided perspective, so that everything that's to do with the mundane world, the mess of life, is avoided or denied as having any substance or any reality or any being worthy of inquiry. I think that's changing now, but to me, that's it's like every part of one's life needs to come awake.
Yeah, that's something I also recognize. Not only I did the same thing, used to do the same thing. I just was interested in the transcendence, and not so much coming back then in the messiness of the world, and the suffering still continues after you realized who you are. And did you awaken suddenly, or was it a gradual process? How was it with you?
Well, that's always a really difficult question to answer. Was it sudden or was it gradual? I mean, I guess that many of the circumstances and conditions and realizations and insights along the way in my life have fed the point where the bud of awakening emerges. I can't say there was anything that led to it directly, and I don't think there ever is, but certainly a kind of cauldron of groundwork had been done. When it seemed to emerge, it was sudden. It was sudden.
So you also say the authentic awakening is radical, and it is 24 hours, 365 days job. Can you say more about that?
What I mean by that is that I guess I'm talking about before and after awakening. It's like the perspective changes, So when I'm speaking with people, like in my groups and my meetings, I'm really speaking to one side of the fence where there is still the search for awakening, the search for freedom. So I'm speaking to that mostly in the sense that it's not enough just to have a spiritual practice, just to be meditating, because very often I get questions about being anchored in the stillness and the silence, and meditation practice, and then I'm saying, well, but your meditation practice is what you do the rest of the time, and actually the practice, if there is a practice, is to bring attention to the field of awakeness that is ever present in everyday life, and that's the real challenge, and that's not something that we can say we do for half an hour, or for 20 minutes twice a day or something like this. And it's something that we can facilitate. It's almost like tilling the soil to bring our attention to that which is already here. And that doesn't give the guarantee of full awakening, but it certainly points us in that direction. And then after awakening, there's also the possibility that the personality vehicle re-identifies with either a lopsided perspective of just formlessness, of just emptiness, or it can re-identify with some other aspect of the personality vehicle, a spiritual self or something like this. But that is also the time where we can keep our conscious intention towards that which that has been recognized as awake.
So in a way,
I call that the maturation of awakening. It's like the bud, and then there's the flower. And very often the bud is recognized, and then it stops right there.
And you say it's something like Raman Maharshi said, just be aware that you're aware. Is that what you mean?
Be aware of awareness itself.
Right. So that is what you would say your meditation throughout the day.
I mean, it's no longer something that I consciously do. For me, it's something that happens. But I think in the early stages, I think that's something that we can consciously bring our attention so that we're rooted in that. Because it's very easy for that subtle opening to close again, or to be moved away from. And I think that's not often recognized, that this idea that there's awakening happens. We see reality, we see truth, we see emptiness, we see beyond the form. And then there's a kind of laziness that sets in. And in that laziness, there's another re-grasping onto that as another form of identity. And it's very, very subtle. But I see that, I've seen that in the process with my own journey, because it's taken so long. So I've had a long time to kind of review that. And I also see that in other people's journeys.
So what happened in your journey? So you had the awakening, and what kind of subtle identities started to creep back in?
Well, for me, there actually wasn't an identification with that. Because I think of the history of my meditation practice, awareness practice, and many other kind of techniques that I've done. So there was a lot of awareness already.
Yes.
not to allow the movement of mind to go back to that and to find self in it again. So that awareness was there. There was a maturity, I guess. On the other hand, after it happened, I had no framework for it. I didn't sit back and say, oh my God, I've awakened. I didn't know. I knew something had happened, but I had no real framework for it. What happened was that life just carried on, and there were some subtle energies that I could sense that were different, but more or less it was just the same. And so the personality was still operating. Certain feelings and thoughts were still there, the same as before. Certain habitual conditioned responses were still there, but something was different. But it just took me a long time to see what was different, to recognize it fully. Almost like the flower took a long time to really mature and bloom. And it's only in retrospect that I could really see a transparency of beingness that had permeated my life. And then it's almost like it all made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are layers and layers and layers of unconscious stuff in us, which normally operate our life. And are you saying that when you woke up, that automatically discharged itself? Or what happened to all these layers? Because you also focus in your book, you talk about the importance of looking at our unconscious
I think what happened
patterns.
for me was that all that unconsciousness, which continued to play itself out, that's exactly what I think I'm describing here, was that it continued to play itself out. It didn't just evaporate in one big fell swoop.
Yes.
But it continued to play itself out. But what was different was that as it was being played out, the capacity to meet it fully, without any distraction of mind, any contortion of mind that would move away from it or deny it or try to change it, the capacity to meet it fully in its glaring agony, that's what was there. It was a full meeting of that. And in that full meeting, as it was met over and over again, and different layers and different stories in different relationships, in different aspects of my life, there was the recognition that what had been met no longer carried a hook or a sticking point or what I call a trace. Once it had been met fully, it evaporated, it dissolved. So gradually layers and layers until it got to the more and more sticky layers. And that's what's really changed. And to me that was a feeling of grace. That what is fully met completely, what is unconscious is allowed to come. It's not that I go looking for that which is unconscious, it's that it just appears. It appears, it comes running in. And in coming running in, I'm willing to fully meet it. And in fully meeting it, it dissolves. It dissolves very quickly, the story around it.
So you fully meeting also means you go through the experience, through the feeling of it.
Yes.
Not only looking at it, but actually through the experience.
It's not understanding it or analyzing it, although those things can come with it. But it's really, really feeling it to its depth. So it's exquisitely agonizing. And in that full meeting, without any sense of self being trying to fix it or control it or change it, something opens. There's a deeper opening that happens, and then it no longer plays itself out in the same way.
So with you, the transparency was there already through the awakening, and in this stillness, whatever came up was looked at.
It was seen. It was seen to be what it was. Or what it is directly in that experience. And that's something that wasn't happening before, because I'd spent a lot of time trying to fix my personality. But what happened after that, it was like the personality didn't matter anymore. The fact that it was fractured or broken, or my history was not the way I wanted it to be and I wanted to change that, none of that played a part anymore. It did for a while as the layers unfolded, and then it just fell away. So yes, there's still a story. Yes, there's still a personality, but it's more permeable. It's more transparent. So it doesn't have the same impact.
Yes. You see, sometimes things go so fast, you know, reactions come out so fast. I only can imagine there was so much stillness already in you that for this process to happen, that you actually saw something coming and were able to look at it. Yeah, if I look at my life, you know, sometimes Ian says something or somebody else and just something comes out much too fast to being able to say, stop, what is that? Is that something we can learn? Is that like a muscle we can train?
Well, I think there is a muscle, yeah. But when we're working on a muscle in that sense, we're kind of working on the surface level.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's great. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good that we can become more conscious of our responses or our reactions.
Yes.
And that's all very good. And in some ways, that's a practice.
Yes.
But there's something much deeper than that that makes that irrelevant.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it's from that depth. It just has its own expression, and actually, it doesn't matter what that expression is. It will change. But it's not our job to try and change it. So it takes the struggle away, it takes the effort away.
So you talk about a cellular enlightenment, which I thought was very interesting. Nobody ever mentioned. I think Ian Kufeyev, I interviewed a few weeks ago. He also touches on similar things as you do. So cellular enlightenment, what does that mean? It's like almost the biology of enlightenment.
Yeah, it's kind of quite basic, if you like. It's quite down to earth, you know.
Right.
Cells are either toxic, or they're not toxic. They're either functioning at optimal well-being, because each cell is a being in itself. Each cell is an entity to itself, in the same way that we think of ourselves as a being, an entity, an individual. So each cell is also that. So each cell can function consciously or unconsciously. And on a very basic, fundamental, physiological level, that cell can be full of toxicity, and therefore not functioning at its highest level, or it can be purified, cleansed, and filled with light, which is its essential nature, and functioning at a high level. When it functions at a high level, there is the possibility for divine intelligence, innate intelligence, which is life itself, to inform the mechanism of the body and the relationship to consciousness and how we act in the world and our choices in the world. So it's a kind of very fundamental level. And I'm not saying that, I don't know, but I'm not saying that like what we eat or what we do with the body actually will lead to awakening.
No, because I know a lot of very fanatic people who eat very healthy. And
So it's not about that, and it's not about an ethical or moral issue, or even a kind of identification with the body as the ultimate, reality. It's something much more holistic than that. And in my experience, I found that it's a vibrational experience, and that when light or awakeness is the fundamental nature of who I am, which it is anyway, it is expressed through the vehicle. There's no other way. Until we die, it is always expressed through a mind-body vehicle. And for me, it's like a diamond. And if that diamond is covered in dust, then the light that emanates from the core of that diamond is going to be muted or distorted. But when the dust is cleansed or polished off the surfaces of the diamond, then that light can come through purely. And I found that in my life, through my relationship with my body, is that there is a natural tendency for the body or the intelligence in the body to know what is the right action or choice that is actually in alignment with the purity of that light. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if this is the same for everyone, but my sense is that the body is becoming more awake also.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah. Were you always in tune with your body?
I wasn't, and then I was. Yeah. For a long time I wasn't, and then I was, yeah.
So how did that shift happen? That you became more in tune with your body?
For me, it happened when I was really depressed. This was a long time ago in my 20s, and I was very depressed for a very long time, to the point that I was taken to various psychologists and psychiatrists. Yeah. And nothing helped, or I certainly wasn't open to anything helping. But something happened through an interaction with somebody. I ended up long distance running. And I was a completely unsporty, unathletic couch potato. I had no interest in anything to do with moving the body. Mm-hmm. And I found that I had a transcendent experience through running, through long distance, or relatively long distance running. I had a transcendent experience, and I experienced myself not as the limited I that I thought I was. It was actually that, perhaps, that was the seed for everything that happened, because I then turned to TM and meditation. In the search for that, I failed. But the running was a kind of a constant that allowed me to see that I was not limited to the body as a paradoxical thing. By being so focused on the body, I was able to transcend the body. And I think that is probably an experience that many, athletes have. Yeah. But that really turned my attention more fine-tuned to the body itself.
Interesting. Mm. Are you still running?
Yes. Yes.
So how come you were so depressed? I know you had a very difficult upbringing, and tell us a little bit about.
How come I was depressed? I don't know. That I was depressed, I do know. Yeah. I think for me that what happened was because of the number of shocks that I had in my childhood. Lots of identity crises, a lot of secrecy about the family roots. I didn't really know who my real father was. So many things happened, and many changes happened that kind of traumatized me from very, very early age, since birth onwards. And I think I retreated into my head, as simple as that. I retreated into a fantasy world where it was safe. I had a lot of deprivation in my childhood. I had quite an unusual upbringing that was quite the opposite of much of the mainstream. Yeah. I was deprived of many of the normal childhood things of the modern world. I also was in a war for some time, so I experienced intense bombing and loss of all our possessions and that kind of thing. So there was a part of me that I guess felt I was being punished. And I retreated into my head to create a fantasy world where everything was perfect, where there was perfect love and perfect world and perfect parents and perfect me. And that became a habit. And that habit just carried on throughout my teens and throughout my 20s. And I guess that resulted in depression. I became what my boyfriend at the time called a bell jar. There was like a big thick glass between me and the world. So I was very internal, mute, so I didn't speak very much, and completely introverted and completely out of touch with anything, let alone my body. And that would turn to suicide because it was just unbearable. You know, I'd been numb for a long time, and then that numbness would intensify to the point that it was unbearable. So I did turn to various suicide attempts, which obviously failed, and then something changed.
And it was the running which changed everything, the
Running
experience?
was the seed of it.
Yes.
Running was the seed that gave me a glimpse of something beyond myself, that almost gave me a hook that kept me going.
Yeah.
The depression, not so much the depression, but the black abyss, which pulled me into wanting to kill myself, which was really more a wanting the ego to die, kept coming back at various times.
Yeah.
And it was that eventually, in my 40s, pulled me into the abyss, in which a vast opening happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because by then I was willing to really die into it.
Yeah, so it was, you entered a very dark place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an existential...
everything collapsed. I think you became homeless.
Oh yes, before that, yes.
Oh, that was already before that.
Yeah, it was before, in my late 20s.
Yeah.
I did experience, I guess, an awakening. It's an awakening, but I wouldn't call it the full flowering of that. It was just really an inner explosion that led me to see very, very clearly and very quickly that the reality that I was experiencing was not the whole story. I was not who I thought I was. The world was not what I thought it was. My desires were not what I thought they were. They were based on a false premise. So I saw the falseness of the whole construct of my reality. And in that, everything collapsed. My external life collapsed, my academic life collapsed, my material life collapsed, and my emotional life collapsed. So it was a kind of spiritual breakthrough. Now, you could call that an awakening. It's a kind of awakening, but it was only the beginning of what led me to what I call the real bud of awakening.
Yeah.
It led me on a journey of self-exploration or self-inquiry.
So when you had, when nothing was left, how did you restart? How did life restart? What helped you?
I had nothing on a physical level.
But you already knew in this moment who you were.
I didn't know who I was.
You didn't.
But I had an awareness that I was not who I thought I was.
Yes.
I was not the person that I'd been conditioned to be. My reasons for doing what I was doing in the world, and at that level, at that time it was an academic direction, was based on a false premise to do with a me, a self that was erroneous, you know, based on false foundations. So I knew what was false. I didn't know what was true.
Yeah, okay.
So at the same time, because the opening was so dramatic, I guess, at least how I experienced it internally and externally, for some reason, I don't know why, I had a lot of, again, transcendent experiences. I had out-of-body experiences, I had visions, I had mystical experiences, which were then confirmed by books that I found, explorations that I did, and I started meditating. I discovered Buddhist meditation and Zen meditation, and I found that actually it was a space that I could fall into quite easily. And that really just opened my awareness so I could see what was false. I still didn't know what was true. And that journey took many years. And I guess that was the groundwork.
Yeah. So we stopped earlier when you were 40 and you fell into this abyss. And then you said a period of time came after that of not knowing. Can you say more about that?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of my life in not knowing.
Yes.
But this was a deeper level of it. The not knowing was just like not... I did write my book, that was a knowing. I knew I had to write it.
So how to find God.
Yes, that was birthed out of that experience.
Yes.
And it really was like a birth. I was just compelled to write it.
Yes.
And it was a real gestation period, like giving birth, where I was in a kind of bubble, a very vulnerable, open place of innocent beingness.
Yeah.
So I wasn't interacting with the world very much. It was a very internal experience. But after that, I didn't know. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to be in the world. Some of the structures, again, in my life seemed to fall away. And I just didn't know. I didn't know how things would unfold. I didn't know what work I was meant to be doing. I didn't know what direction I was meant to be going in. And I was very open to that, not knowing.
And you feel comfortable in this space of not knowing?
There's a kind of comfort in it, because I think I've spent a lot of my life in not knowing.
Yeah.
Not knowing who my father is, not knowing what my roots are, not knowing where the next meal's coming from,
Yeah.
not knowing where I'm going to live, and so there's a kind of not knowingness that is a comfort for me.
And because at that time you weren't living in your mind,
No.
I guess it was much easier to stay in the not knowing as well,
Yeah.
because you were more in your body. It seems to be a very feminine thing to be able to stay with the not knowing.
Yeah. It's a little like having a baby. You don't know. You can't see it.
Yeah.
You don't know whether it's going to be a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
Of course, unless you're told.
Yeah.
But really, you don't know. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't
Yeah.
know what shape and form it's going to come out as. You don't know how healthy or deformed it's going to be. You don't know when it's going to be born.
Yeah.
There's a real surrender to that.
Yeah.
And I guess what happened to me after that time was a really deep surrender to life, and an allowingness of a response to life rather than a idea of how life would be.
Yes.
There was an idea, if you like, an agenda that came in with that book, because when it was published, there was a push to be in the world, to be an author, to speak about it, to teach about it, and that kind of thing. Otherwise, you can write a book and it just stays in your shelf at home.
Sure.
So there was a push to that, not so much from me, but from other forces. And I did dabble with that and struggle with that, because what happened in that was that the old way of being, the personality came in, and the old habitual responses and the fears and the not good enough and all these kind of things, the old stories came in with that. And I could say that was a distraction, but actually it was perfect, because it was actually those experiences that brought everything that was unconscious to do with being in the world, which was my issue.
Yeah.
Because I was very retracted still, very internal, that brought everything to the surface, and to see that I am not that. So it was a kind of more glaring revelation of all that was false on a deeper level to what happened when I was in my 20s. It was almost like a revisiting of that, but on a different level. Certainly a more conscious, awake level. And that really did something. And when that had burnt through, so it was like, not this, not this, not this, this isn't who I am, not this, this isn't true. Then another period of not knowing came, and that was much more delicate. It was even more surrendered. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then, gradually, something started to speak. But it spoke from a very different place. It's almost like the personality had to be really smashed. in my case.
Yeah.
It's almost like it just had to be beaten.
Yeah. Yeah, you say suffering became your doorway to freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were really, you became a lover of what is, unafraid to get right up close and intimate with whatever appears.
I love the quote from Neem Karoli Baba,
Yeah.
which is, I love suffering, it brings me closer to God. Yeah, to me that really spoke to me.
Yeah, there's truth
Yeah,
in that.
yeah.
In my own experience, that in the middle of deepest suffering, I found the most beauty. Yeah.
And that's not to say that we identify with the story of suffering, because that's not there anymore.
Yeah.
That story of suffering really isn't here anymore. But everything is met fully. And I don't know. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in life.
Yeah.
My mother died 2 months ago, and there was a suffering in that experience. In her suffering, which was met fully as one being. That one being recognized itself in that. So there isn't a story of suffering around that now. There's no clinging to that loss or that pain or her suffering, because it was fully met.
So it's
But
just
it wasn't
experience.
avoided. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe my partner will die. I don't know who, life brings these
Well,
things.
that's the truth. We don't know anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the story of the suffering is gone. Yeah. The suffering itself, the nakedness of it, that is always possible to be experienced. If it's here, if it's not here, then it's not.
It's true. Yeah.
But the story of it has gone,
Yeah.
which is like, why is it happening to me? And
But isn't it that suffering happens through a story, through thoughts? I can think myself right here into the biggest suffering.
Well, that's the story of suffering, yeah.
Yes. So, but doesn't suffering always start with a story, or with some kind of thoughts?
If something was in front of you right now, a child, or an animal, a dog, a cow, whatever,
Yeah.
and somebody came along and slit its throat, what would be your direct experience?
I would feel it.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
That's the
feel
kind of
it.
suffering I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The very, very direct experience of pain.
Yes.
Yeah? Of suffering on the human level, or the sentient being level. That's not a story of suffering.
Yeah.
That's a direct experience of it. Once fully experienced, it's gone. And then you respond in whatever way is moving through you, either to stop that injury or to bury that, or whatever needs to happen, or to pick it up and hold it, whatever needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, if it starts in the mind as a memory,
Sure.
then that's not the meeting of it directly.
Yeah.
And that's what's gone. There's not a cogitating, a going over of a story of the suffering.
Yes.
If it's here, it's here, and if it's not here, it's not here.
So that brings me to the question of, is that also which helps the mind sink into the heart? What allows the mind sink into the heart?
Surrender. The willingness to totally surrender all notions of what anything is. Yeah? Even the experience of awakeness or enlightenment or realization or truth. Because as long as there's a notion of it, even if it's very subtle, then it remains in the mind. And this is very tricky. Yeah, and very difficult to see when one is immersed in it, if one's immersed in it, because it's like a very subtle veil that creates another blind spot. But only the deepest surrender, which is, it requires an incredible vulnerability and an incredible sacrifice of the most subtle remnants of self, will allow it to drop into the heart. And sometimes this happens in steps. It's almost like we dip our toe into it and then we back out again. Because the problem with surrender is that the mind gets hold of that.
Of the surrender.
Yeah, and tries to do surrender.
Yes.
That's where it gets sticky
Yes.
or tricky. The mind tries to do surrender, and as long as the mind is trying to do anything, then that's not it. It's such a death. Yeah, it's such a sacrifice. It's such a crucifixion. And that's what happened when I met the abyss, was finally, once and for all, any sense of mind movement was crucified. And that was experienced an absolute annihilation of self. It's such an unknownness. It's a complete falling off into the abyss of unknownness. And this is so unknown to us because even speaking these words gives us an idea of what it looks like, a description. And even that's going to create another veil. Yeah. And so this has to be experienced for each of us very, very individually. And nothing can prepare us for this. It's such a willingness. It's such a, I guess it arises from a deep place where you would rather die than maintain any notion of self, because that notion of self is samsara. Yeah.
So how much plays grace into all that?
Grace to me is what happened afterwards. I think in retrospect, it seems to me that grace is always the doer, if it can be a doer. Yeah, it's grace that brings us into certain circumstances. It's grace that reveals the pain so that we can meet it. It's grace that, if you like, is the fabric of reality, but we don't recognize that. It can be recognized afterwards, but again, it doesn't always look the way that we think, because there's this idea again, and when I'm speaking with people, I notice this, that grace is that means, everything's falling into place just perfectly. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's pleasant. It's spiritual. Everything's going with the flow, but grace isn't always like this. So it's a kind of deeper understanding of what grace is.
So what is grace? What's the deepest understanding of grace?
It's a fragrance. For me, it's a fragrance. Again, it's like surrender. No words can actually grasp it. So as soon as there's a description of it, it's not it. So the closest I can get to it, it's like a fragrance, and it's very delicate. It's a bedfellow with surrender. When life is lived in surrender, grace is like the pillow life rides on. And that becomes like a thread that runs through one's life. It's like a river. Yeah? And in that river, nothing leaves a trace. So it's going back to meeting everything. Everything is met fully as it is happening. And as it is happening and it's met fully, it doesn't leave a trace. It doesn't leave a memory. It doesn't leave a projection into the future. It doesn't have an agenda. So there is the experience of living in the eternal now, in eternal presence. And that is such a relief, because you're not carrying the baggage of the past, and you're not pushing it out into the future as an agenda, both of which are very heavy.
But in this moment we are disappeared.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And that's
There's
freedom.
nobody there.
That's freedom.
That's when
Yeah.
there's no trace.
There's no trace.
Yeah.
And of course, there is also a linear mind that keeps operating. That linear mind does have a past and a future. It does have the capacity to plan. It does have the capacity to reflect and go into its memory banks. But rather than that being at the forefront and being the main driver of the show, it's something that we can tap into as a tool, a mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah? Sometimes when people ask me, oh, what have you been up to then? You know, where have you been speaking recently, or I don't know, whatever. It's like I have to stop and I have to go and backtrack to really dig into the memory banks to pull those things out, because they're not here. They're not playing themselves out, or, you know, what are your plans for the future? I really have to shift my gears to go into that space. And of course, when I'm planning things or organizing things, which obviously I have to do both in my private life and in my work life, then that is operating. But it operates because it's fulfilling its rightful purpose. Its rightful purpose is to get the job done. And so there's a clarity and there's a focus to it that is also experienced as grace. Yeah, it isn't weighed down. It isn't, it doesn't have toxicity attached to it, if you like, sort of mental toxicity attached to it. Yeah, so it flows and it has a purpose. And then when that isn't operating, it's kind of put to the side, just naturally moves to the side. Yeah, and all of that is grace.
Yes. I think we need some big grace in our time for our planet Earth. You talk about also the crisis point we are in the moment. Can you say more about it? What do you know? Do you think we make it or we don't make it? Where is evolution driving us? You say evolution is a yes mechanism, and creation doesn't. It gives rise to all creation, even those that are destructive.
I don't know the outcome.
Yeah, sure. We
How
don't know
can we
anything.
know the outcome? We don't know anything.
But what would you? How? Is there anything we can do?
Go inside and recognize who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a crisis of consciousness. Everything
Yeah, you
appears
said
to be
that's
falling
something.
apart. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not. It's the breakdown is not in the outer world. It's the inner world, and I thought that was really interesting. What you said. It's the inner world which reached the crisis point. So what does that mean?
We're so busy trying to fix everything and save everything. To save the planet, to save the world. But our attempts at saving anything, whether it be the world or another person or even ourselves, that attempt is arising out of a false sense of identity.
Out of separation.
out of separation. And as long as there's separation or division within, then that vibration, that frequency of division will come through our actions and express itself through the world, as it does in our lives. So a divided inside cannot create a whole outside. Because each of us is like a beacon. And so we're constantly transmitting either division, separation, or wholeness, unity. Wholeness or unity can only be embodied when we recognize our innate wholeness.
Makes sense.
That which we are beyond self, personality, conditioned responses. Only when we fully awaken to the awakeness that is inherent in us, and that awakeness starts to become our living reality, then our actions will vibrate or transmit as wholeness. So then what we do or don't do doesn't matter, but in that doing or not doing, the outcome will be wholeness. So rather than looking outside for how we can fix things and change things, which is like Band-Aid, spiritual Band-Aid or planetary Band-Aid or ecological Band-Aid, we have to go within and discover the truth. That's the only thing we can really do, if that's a doing. Yeah? To turn around. It's a revolution in consciousness. And then, as each beacon comes alight, the possibility for change on a planetary level becomes a real possibility. Maybe it won't happen in the next few years. Maybe it's a long process that we don't know. There's a tendency to want it to happen overnight. Yeah? And there's a lot of people that talk about oneness and world peace and, living in this place of harmony where everything is beautiful and we all love each other. But actually they haven't gone inside. They're still operating from a place of inner division. Inner division means that they have not fully met everything that is unconscious in themselves. There is an avoidance or a denial or a projection or a fear, and that perpetuates the inner division. So it's a profound journey, a vertical journey rather than a horizontal journey. It's a complete shift in perspective. And I think that that's what I understand. My feeling, my sense, my inner vision is happening in the world as the appearance of things breaking down on a material level, on an economic, ecological, political level, social level, pharmaceutical level, but actually it's a crisis of consciousness. Whether we survive or not, I don't know. And in some ways it doesn't matter.
Yes. Our time, unfortunately, is up, Amoda. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming, Amoda. And I show your books again. One is How to Find God. I meant to ask you if you found God in everything, but that's obvious after the interview. Change Your Life, Change Your World, and look out for the new book, which is coming out hopefully soon. And the title is Radical Awakening. So thank you for watching Conscious TV, and thank you, Amoda, again, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.